The title of this video is called Fukushima Turned Japan into a Shithole. To show no disrespect to the people of Japan, but nuclear power ruined their country. They didn't have anything to do with it. Those turds, TEPCO and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe,
they are the ones that are responsible for the contaminated shithole it's turned out to be. They are both lying about Fukushima. Now this is the sphincter of the shithole.
Before we continue, I think it's ironic that they are closed on the weekends, considering this is a level 7 on the nuclear scale, that they have time that they can take the weekends off. I advise you to come over here and add a comment. Now here is what's causing all the trouble, is this site. Now if you look at the barrels here, today is 2018, so we're going on the 7-year anniversary. These barrels, they have no more room to contain the nuclear waste that's leaking, and they're trying to siphon out of the basements of the reactor buildings to have an equilibrium, so actually it doesn't get worse. They're just maintaining the status quo, actually. You could even go to the live TEPCO cam. As you'll notice, there's no one ever working there, and hey, maybe you'll even catch a meltdown, but there's no more room to put the stuff, so they want to dump all this radiation into the Pacific Ocean. But isn't it amazing that this one little spot on the planet is responsible
for so much contamination?
Well, Tokyo Electric has been in denial, trying to downplay the full impact of this nuclear accident. However, there's a formula, a mathematical formula by which you can determine what level this accident is. This accident has already released something on the order of 50,000 trillion becquerels of radiation. You do the math. That puts it right smack in the middle of a level 7 nuclear accident. Still less than Chernobyl. However, radiation is continuing to leak out of the reactors. The situation is not stable at all. So you're looking at basically a ticking time bomb. It appears stable, but the slightest disturbance, a secondary earthquake, a pipe break, evacuation of the crew at Fukushima, could set off a full-scale meltdown at 3 nuclear power stations, far beyond what we saw at Chernobyl.
Talk about exactly, I mean, as a physicist, to explain to people exactly what has taken place in Japan at these nuclear power plants.
Think of driving a car, and the car all of a sudden lunges out of control. You hit the brakes don't work. That's because the earthquake wiped out the safety systems in the first minute of the earthquake and tsunami. Then your radiator starts to heat up and explodes. That's the hydrogen gas explosion. And then to make it worse, the gas tank is heating up, and all of a sudden your whole car is going to be in flames. That's the full-scale meltdown. So what do? You drive the car into a river. That's what the utility did by putting seawater from the Pacific Ocean, in a desperate attempt to keep water on top of the core. But then seawater has salt in it, and that gums up your radiator. And so what do? You call out the local firemen. And so now you have these Japanese samurai warriors. They know that this is potentially a suicide mission. They're coming in with hose water, trying to keep water over the melted nuclear reactor cores. So that's the situation now. So when the utility says that things are stable, it's only stable in the sense that you're dangling from a cliff, hanging by your fingernails, and as the time goes by, each fingernail starts to crack. That's the situation now.
Now, here is a number of the spent fuel rods that were in the reactors at the time of the accidents. Keep these numbers in mind. There's assemblies in the reactor, or 400 assemblies in Unit 1, and so forth. And that's in the reactor core. Here's the amount of assemblies in the spent fuel pool, and here's tons of fuel in the spent fuel pool. This is TEPCO released images during the early days, and as you could see, steam pouring out of the reactor buildings. Here are fuel rods that blew all over the place. Like, where did this stuff go to? How can you even pick this stuff up? See the fuel rods in there? There's nothing left of these buildings, but they're going to want us to believe that people are... Look at the steam pouring out of this. I'm surprised that they really let these images go out to the public. Now look at the extent of the damage here. It looks like it... Look at the walls are bulging here. And every one of these walls are blown out. It looks like it was a explosion from the center of the buildings that just blew out everything. Look how cracked everything is. They were trying to spray them to keep them cooled, which really didn't work. The Fukushima 50, who probably are no longer with us anymore. That's where the spent fuel pools are. There's holes everywhere you go. Now it says, experts say the spent fuel pool is a concern because it holds all of Unit 4's thousands of rods, which were being stored for maintenance on the reactor when the March 11th earthquake and tsunami hit. Now also remember, Unit 3 contained MOX fuel, which is a combination with plutonium. Now, to prove that, to downplay Fukushima, this guy's got the nerve to go eat seafood that was caught off of Fukushima. Now, the Japanese leader attempts to dispel fear over Fukushima fallout by sampling the local seafood. Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister, has tucked into a slice of octopus caught close to the Fukushima nuclear power plant and declared local seafood to be good and safe. Mr. Abe visited the town of Soma, 26 miles north of the crippled reactors, at the weekend as part of the government's efforts to convince domestic consumers and the rest of the world that Japanese seafood and produce can be eaten. We will work to wipe out harmful rumors by giving out accurate information, he told a group of residents before savoring the slice of octopus tentacle. I want everyone in the country to know they are good and safe, he declared of the seafood laid out by the local fishery cooperative. Fishermen returned to the sea in late September on a trial basis with their catches tested for radiation.
This next item made a lot of U.S. consumers sit up and take notice today. Bluefin tuna caught off the California coast have been found to contain elevated levels of radioactive matter dating back to the Japanese earthquake and tsunami that led to that nuclear accident at the Fukushima power plant. Our report tonight from NBC's Miguel Almaguer.
Today at the San Pedro Fish Market in Southern California, Don Cadota inspects the catch of the day and stressed his fish are safe to eat.
The word radiation creates fear in people.
The 15 bluefin tuna caught and tested off California's coast last summer showed low levels of radiation, but still 10 times higher than normal. Scientists say it's the first time a fast-moving migrating fish has been shown to carry radioactivity from Japanese waters.
We almost didn't believe it, to tell you the truth.
Dr. Nicholas Fisher, professor of marine sciences, co-authored the study.
Every single fish was significantly contaminated with 2 radioisotopes of cesium. And these are common waste products from nuclear accidents.
The research shows the bluefin tuna that spawn and feed in the waters near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant migrated some 6,000 miles, reaching Southern California just a few months after the disaster. Though the sample fish are contaminated, the levels are far lower than what's considered dangerous.
Today, the FDA said they'll continue to monitor radiation levels in fish, and no public health concern has been detected.
I don't think I'll change the way that I eat, not at the moment.
It's definitely made me alter just a little bit, not eat quite so much.
However, there are some radioactive elements that will not rapidly disappear, and it is these long-lived radionuclides that will remain to negatively affect the health of all complex life forms that are exposed to them. Chief among them is cesium-137, which has taken on special significance because it's proven to be the most abundant of the long-lived radionuclides that has remained in the environment following the nuclear disasters at Chernobyl and Fukushima. It has a 30-year radioactive half-life, which is why it persists in the environment. Scientists now believe that it will be 180 to 320 years before the cesium-137 around the destroyed Chernobyl reactor actually disappears from the environment. Cesium is water-soluble and quickly makes its way into soils and waters. It's the same atomic family as potassium, and it mimics it, acting as a macronutrient. It quickly becomes ubiquitous in contaminated ecosystems. It is distributed by the catastrophic accidents at nuclear power plants because large quantities of volatile radioactive cesium build up inside the fuel rods of nuclear reactors. Thus, any accident at a nuclear reactor that causes the fuel rods to rupture, melt, or burn will cause the release of radioactive cesium gas. Long-lived radionuclides, such as cesium-137, are something new to us as a species. They did not exist on Earth in any appreciable quantities during the entire evolution of complex life. Although they are invisible to our senses, they are millions of times more poisonous than most of the common poisons we are familiar with. Because cancer, leukemia, genetic mutations, birth defects, malformations, and abortions at concentrations almost below human recognition and comprehension, they are lethal at the atomic or molecular level. They emit radiation, invisible forms of matter and energy that we might compare to fire, because radiation burns and destroys human tissue. But unlike the fire of fossil fuels, the nuclear fire that issues forth from radioactive elements cannot be extinguished. It is not a fire that can be scattered or suffocated, because it burns at the atomic level. It comes from the disintegration of single atoms. Thus, radioactivity is a term which indicates how many radioactive atoms are disintegrating in a time period. We measure the intensity of radioactivity by the rate of disintegrations and the energy they produce. 1 becquerel is equal to 1 atomic disintegration per second. 1 curie is defined as that amount of any radioactive material that will decay at a rate of 37 billion disintegrations per second. So 1 curie equals 37 billion becquerels. On March 14th, the easterly winds which have been blowing the highly radioactive gases and aerosols coming from Fukushima out to sea shifted and pushed the radioactive plume back over the Japanese mainland. You can see the progression. The red indicates the radioactive plume. Note that the images indicate that the plume first went south over Tokyo and then reversed and went north as the wind changed. All the areas where the radioactive gases passed over were contaminated. However, the heaviest contamination occurred where where it rained out. And this accounts for the patchy deposition of the radioactive fallout. 8 months after the disaster, the Japanese Science Ministry released this map. That's the one with the, let's see, it would be on your right, which shows that 11,580 square miles, which is 30,000 square kilometers, which represents 13% of the Japanese mainland, had been contaminated with long-lived radioactive cesium.
Long-lived radioactive cesium.
Note that the official map does not note any cesium-137 contamination in the Tokyo metropolitan area, unlike an unofficial survey done about the same time by Professor Yukio Hayakawa of Gunma University. Given the fact that the Japanese government and TEPCO denied for 2 months that any meltdowns that had occurred at Fukushima, one must look at all official data with a healthy degree of skepticism. 4,500 square miles, or earlier today we heard 7,700 square miles, which is an area larger than the size of Connecticut, was found to have radiation levels that exceeded Japan's previously allowable exposure rate of 1 millisievert per year. Rather than evacuate this area, Japan chose to raise its acceptable radiation exposure rate by 20 times, from 1 millisievert to 20 millisieverts per year. However, approximately 300 square miles adjacent to the destroyed Fukushima reactors were so contaminated they were declared uninhabitable. 159,000 Japanese were evicted from this radioactive exclusion zone, lost their homes, property, and businesses, and most have received only a small compensation to cover the costs of their living as evacuees.
The Japanese government has admitted to another case of withholding reliable data about the Fukushima accident. The U.S. government offered the Japanese government a map showing the spread of radiation soon after the nuclear accident occurred at Fukushima Daiichi. However, the Japanese authorities did not release the data to the public.
However, the Japanese authorities did not release the data to the public.
The Energy Department provided the map to the Japanese Foreign Ministry on March 18th and 20th. Promptly after that, the ministry passed on the data to the Science Ministry and the Nuclear and Industry Safety Agency. However, neither body released the information.
Nearly 3 years after the earthquake and tsunami, the plant is still emitting radiation and likely will be for years.
3 miles from the plant, roads are still closed. Radiation levels here soar 100 times higher than normal. TEPCO, the company that owns the crippled plant, is still struggling to deal with the disaster. All 4 reactors are still emitting radiation, but TEPCO has made some progress.
This is what TEPCO wants us to see.
They'll be calling you a radical, back to Fukushima and fainting goats, the epic denial. You know, look, the American populace herded off the fucking cliff. Good sheep, good sheep.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So they built them exactly like the ones for Fukushima.
Old TEPCO video. And Tokyo Electric.
Now this is Unit 3 he's showing you. In the bottom right-hand corner is what it looks like now. In the top left-hand corner is what it's supposed to look like. The reactor is to your left-hand side in the bottom. And the spent fuel pool where no camera or robot can go, here you are, they're showing you a picture where there's a camera where we know it can't go. So it's fake. Because we know now, 6 years later, that couldn't have been done. See?
Electric had gone into the Unit 3 fuel pool just once. You remember?
Now he's claiming that people went into the building below just once. But he's not telling them, he's not showing this big picture. This is very early in the game. Now here's him talking about number 4. Now where the video of him starts out at is where the fuel pool is supposed to be. The reactor is to your right-hand side below the Geiger counter. That's at 211 counts per minute.
The Unit 4 was damaged twice. It was damaged by all of the earthquakes that occurred. And it was also damaged by a series of explosions over the first week or two of the accident. So the building is structurally weakened. Now, Tokyo Electric's acknowledged that. They went in May and June of last year. This is more than a year ago, and put an enormous number of extra structural supports directly under the fuel pool to keep the bottom of the pool from breaking through.
Computer simulation shows how radioactivity is spread around the world from the disabled Fukushima Daiichi plant. The simulation was created by a group of researchers at the University of Tokyo and Kyushu University and released on Wednesday. The simulation is based on the scenario in which contaminated air was vented from the disabled number 2 reactor building on March 14th, 3 days after the massive earthquake and tsunami. Computer images show the radioactive material was lifted 5,000 meters into the air.
That's 3 miles.
It was then carried by westerly winds and spread over the Pacific Ocean. The images indicate that on the 4th day after being vented, the substances reached the west coast of the United States, and on the 7th day, they approached Iceland after crossing the Atlantic.
Having said all this stuff, I know it sounds a bit waffly, but I mean, I would like to wait and see somebody actually measure the gamma radiation spectrum of whatever it is that's supposed to be coming in and causing the irradiation of America, because it's very hard to imagine how there could be a 5-fold increase in natural background radiation from the sort of material that's coming from Fukushima. It's just too far away.
It's just too far away. So he's setting the stage to say, don't worry about it.
I mean, I had the same problem with somebody in Brazil who was finding enormously high levels of radioactivity in the water, and he was assuming it was coming on the jet stream from Fukushima, which is impossible because it's just too far.
Now he's saying it's too far for anybody in another country besides North America.
And it turned out the thing had a half-life. You know, he got some tissues and measured the half-life, put it in a plastic bag and so on. And it turned out to be quite a short half-life, so it was obviously radon. It couldn't have come from Fukushima, and
It's obviously radon? It couldn't have been from Fukushima. So that's the end of him. Now, Dr. Helen Caldercott, she's got 14 books. She's the world's most famous nuclear activist. Listen to what she's going to tell us.
And especially Building 3 is very fragile. It's still got a huge cooling pool on its roof, protected by nothing. The molten core has melted its way down onto the concrete of the containment vessel, but maybe into the earth. And if that collapsed, there would be a nuclear inferno.
Yeah, it collapsed. It's gone. She knows it. So she's out there lying. Now listen to what she says about number 4.
Building 4 is also similarly fragile, and it's got a huge cooling pool on top with all its fuel rods, but they have been removing them. And it's been a very delicate procedure, and they've removed almost all. So if that collapsed now, I think it would probably be okay.
And so what I'm showing you to the left-hand side in these depictions are the buildings they're talking about, how they're already gone. They knew that, and these were the experts, right? And so they were lying.
Endless lies. Just endless. Lie, non-stop. That's their legacy. It's never told the truth once. Not a single time. Not one freaking time have they told us the truth. Fabrication, misdirections, misrepresentation, and outrageous, deadly, vicious lies.
So I want to be very clear. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the United States, whether it's the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. Let me repeat that. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. That is the judgment of our Nuclear Regulatory Commission and many other experts. Furthermore, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and public health experts do not recommend that people in the United States take precautionary measures beyond staying informed. And going forward, we will continue to keep the American people fully updated, because I believe that you must know what I know as president.
The Fukushima nuclear disaster is far from over, and the true suffering has yet to begin, as the true effect of the radiation on people's health will take years to reveal itself. The authorities, the Japanese government, TEPCO, IAEA, and etc., they keep downplaying the situation, and mainstream media has all but forgotten about it.
Many people in other countries think that it's over. That's why I think it's important to continue reporting and analyzing the information.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
That was the case until the Fukushima nuclear accident. Recently, people all over the world have been buying lots of Geiger counters. One of the reasons that people have been buying Geiger counters is because the news coming from Fukushima is really, number one, it's very bad news, and number two, there's not enough of it. People don't have a good sense of their safety. They don't have a good sense of what's going on.
Now here's the global deposits of the cesium-137 from the Fukushima
Daiichi nuclear power plant. Fukushima did not only contaminate the air, it's also contaminating the sea by leaking every day since that meltdown and melt-throughs 7 years ago. Every day since, it's sending 300 tons of water into the Pacific Ocean. Now here's the model simulation here's just plume 1. There are many plumes, and there are actually 3 meltdowns, but 6 cores were damaged. That was the largest nuclear power plant in the world. Now even TEPCO, who's responsible for working on this, their press release in 2018, that it states that they've been treating the water accumulated in a radioactive waste treatment facility in this high temperature incinerator building. They might be boiling this water and just have the leftovers of highly radioactive materials. Now this is not only a Japan thing, this is a global thing, and they're talking about previously unpublished maps from government scientists show the plume of Fukushima is already at the Alaskan coast. Becquerels are disintegrations per second. Now, they say that everybody on the average was dosed with 1 dose from Fukushima, everyone on the globe. What pushed all this stuff out. And they're trying to say, it seems hard to believe that this spent fuel pool, every wall is blown out and there was no damage to these walls. This is why they were leaking though.
No. It's not true. That's impossible.
And as we watch that, Malcolm Grimston, what are your thoughts?
That's, I mean, still speculating. One possibility of that is a hydrogen-oxygen explosion. That's quite an energetic one, or some sort of chemical explosion from the, they do use oil and other things within the plant. But that's a big explosion. I very strongly suspect that's not an actual nuclear explosion in the sense that the nuclear materials were involved in that. The issue is that if that's damaged the containment, the nuclear materials may be able to escape from that. Because this far into the accident, it's very difficult to imagine that the nuclear process could restart, although that is certainly something which will be investigated.
What strikes people, I'm sure, about watching a couple of things, as you say, whether that has caused damage in itself. I mean, presumably, at a plant like that, an explosion is something you want to avoid.
No, an explosion of that size is serious. There's no doubt about that. And if it depends on, firstly, whether it was actually an explosion within the containment, which we just don't know as yet. One thing we do know is that if that did involve the nuclear thing, we'll be seeing very high levels of contamination very quickly. So information should be becoming available as to what type of explosion it was. But clearly that's a very energetic explosion to be doing that. We're not looking here at something collapsing because of the effects of the earthquake, which was one possibility. That's clearly not the case.
And we've had pictures of this site before what happened and then afterwards. And after this explosion, it appears that we see instead of an intact building, as you would expect, you then see a sort of skeletal structure there where the walls have crumbled. And as you say, we're speculating at this distance and this stage and at this time, but significant damage has been caused.
Yeah, I mean, in most plants, the actual working part is built underground, and so anything above the surface is mainly just empty space to allow things like the cranes in maintenance and the like. So the real question is not what we can see here, but what's just underneath the surface of what we can see here. And kind of what I've no doubt they'll start doing is trying to get a view from looking down into the reactor, which and some of those techniques were developed at Chernobyl, where there was some aerial plant with folks looking down, gave a much clearer idea of what was happening.
Now, we understand there has been a press conference in the last few minutes. I'm just looking through the wires here at some of the comments that have been made. The official line is it's not clear if the damaged building housed the reactor. An official said the utility that runs the plant was reporting several workers may have been injured, and we saw the power of that explosion there, which is perhaps not surprising. The big question now, of course, as you were saying, Malcolm, is about the radiation levels. Now, how quickly could that be detected? I mean, would they know immediately?
Well, within a few minutes, I'd have thought, because they will have, nuclear scientists of their nature have very sophisticated monitoring, because that's often your early warning as to whether something, not on this scale, but a small anomaly may be happening. So they'll have very sensitive material in real time.
Now, radiation near Tokyo spiked 100 million times normal after Fukushima. Intensive contamination hit the Tokyo area, extremely high levels detected. Info about radioactive contamination hidden from public. Well, that was only 7 years ago. The first half-life just of cesium-137 is 30 years. So we're at the infancy that this stuff is still there. And when you get into some of these other isotopes, like plutonium and strontium and uranium, where you're having half-lives of 2 billion years or something ridiculous, this stuff is going to be here forever. We're only into year 7. So Tokyo is still contaminated. It's a nuclear waste site. Tokyo contaminated and not fit for habitation. 23 districts of Tokyo are contaminated, with the eastern area the worst affected. It's up to 4,000 becquerels a kilogram. While practicing in Tokyo, this guy discovered that there's changes in the white blood cells of children under 10. Now, it's not only the oceans being affected, the air being affected, humans are being affected, especially the young. Now here's the decay of the cesium. In 30 years, half of it is going to be decayed into barium. It's going to take 300 years to completely go away. That's a long ways away, and Fukushima is still a baby. This is outskirts of Tokyo, it states. On the ground, it's going up to 5 microsieverts. And every time it rains, it's being redistributed for the next million years. Fukushima radiation found in Hawaii fish. Almost half contain fallout from Japan nuclear disaster. What they're telling you is, when they do these studies, they're all saying that it's safe for you to still ingest. Now, 13 commonly consumed types of fish caught in the North Pacific, locally available in Hawaii, were analyzed. All fish samples had detectable cesium-137 above a 95% confidence. 3 out of the 13 samples had cesium-134, an isotope indicative of Fukushima releases detected above 95% confidence. Now, the highest concentration was in this ahi tuna, and it doesn't matter what number it is, because one isotope is bad. That's what Fukushima changed the world. Here's where it's bleeding, and it's sending it straight to the United States. But it doesn't stop there. It's going to get kicked back up again and be regurgitated, and it's going to be just, for the next 100,000 years, just radiation building up. Ooh. $120,000 sites. I think 30 million one-ton bags. It's just disgusting what they're doing to this property. Let's see if we can go down there and see. This was in 2013 a empty field, and now it's radioactive waste. But the thing is this stuff is going to eventually decay and end up going back into the environment. This is such a sad sight over here. Oh, look, isn't this ironic? Solar panels right next to pyramids of nuclear waste. Now, this is interesting. Someone did a radiocesium in the irrigation ponds in that city. They were out of Colorado. And what I wanted to show you is in Japan, the areas surrounding the Fukushima accident site contain a range of small irrigation ponds. There are 150 similar water bodies alone. The ponds in the affected areas were primarily used for regulating the irrigation ponds of rice paddies, meaning there's a lot of water exchange there. And this is about the cesium that's getting into this soil. And growing rice is going to have a big impact now and in the future. And when you think about it, the rice beds, the rice paddies are lower, so they're holes that are actually in the ground. And if you're looking at these cores that they did where the cesium is in the soil, they're going down 25 centimeters and it's still there. And if you look at the levels, this is 100,000 becquerels. This is 1,000 becquerels. No, that's 10,000. That's 100,000. So in the middle here is 50,000 becquerels. Is what a kilogram. That's the activity of cesium in the soil in all these different places. This one's all the way down to 50 centimeters. It's who knows how far this goes down. It could be getting down to 100 centimeters. Who knows when this ends in this area. So it just goes to show that this stuff is going to move around and be with us and migrate for a very long time. That's Okuma. Okay, they have approximately 11,000 people there. The history, it says that it's believed to be ruled by some clan at the beginning of the middle 12th century. They've lived in this area, this ancient land. And now it's a hot zone. Areas where they're actually cutting off payment to the citizens and forcing them back into these areas. There's restricted areas. And then there's areas where they may actually return in a couple years, but definitely a lot of areas where they'll never be able to go. Now, the problem is they're decontaminating areas and they just get recontaminated. Japanese Prime Minister promised that the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant was under control to get the bid for Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. He says a complete lie. You got to go to some sites that if you want to know what's really going on, this Energy News is where you want to head to. Fukushima Everything, this is where you want the headlines. If you want to know what's going on and up to date. And if you want to know video-wise, Beautiful Girl by Dana, I encourage every day there's a new update. He knows what he's talking about. They cover more than I could even cover. And this guy, Dana Durnford, he actually did 5,000 miles on the British Columbia coast and documented that right now, post-Fukushima, there's barely 100 species total on the west coast, where it used to be 7,000 species in a tidal pool. This is an extinction level event that he's proving. And unfortunately, the people in Japan, if they try to speak about it, they can get thrown in jail because Japan whistleblowers face a crackdown under a proposed law. It says journalists, whistleblowers in Japan could find themselves facing long spells of prison for divulging and reporting state secrets, including sensitive information about the Fukushima nuclear disaster. It's not even northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. It's just the whole globe is contaminated. Here's I found the worldview. Here's the clouds on the 11th of March for that week. And they're very lucky that at the beginning it was blowing from west to east, but it did change and blow it right back in their face. In 2013, Japanese officials have admitted for the first time that thousands of people evacuated from areas near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant may never be able to return home. A report by members of the governing Liberal Democratic Party and its junior coalition partner urges the government to abandon its promise to all 160,000 evacuees that their irradiated homes will be fit to live in again. This is what they destroyed. Nuclear power destroyed. You can't go to these places now. They're abandoned. They're cemeteries. You can't visit your loved ones. This is basically what happens when you have nuclear. You have to abandon your towns. And this is what they got to look forward to. This is what their city is filled with. With 30 million one-ton bags of radiation. That are what? Sitting in wet, low areas that will be definitely ripping up and decaying the bags in 10 years. And when the tsunami hits again, it's going to be a million times worse. How can it get any worse? And this is why, because it ends up leaking into the ground, getting into the ocean, coming up out of the ocean, coming down in precipitation. And the bottom of the food chain, the plankton, the phytoplankton, it's in it already. The zooplankton, it's in it already. So you end up going through the food chain, and we're up on top. I didn't have to tell you Fukushima turned Japan into a shithole, because I guess they already knew. Look at this. This is basically a good picture of the future of Japan's kids. They're flushing them down the toilet. Fukushima will leak radiation into the sea forever.
And let's be blunt about this. Would you buy food that says made in Chernobyl? And the Japanese people are also saying, what, should I buy food that says made in Fukushima? Just because the government tries to lowball all the numbers, downplay the severity of the accident, and that's making it much worse.
Look at this, right up against the ocean, when the water can come in and just knock all that stuff around. People driving and working right next to it. You know how much radiation is coming out of these bags? You wouldn't be able to believe it unless you've seen it. And now that you've seen it, I guess you gotta believe it. Unbelievable. Incredible. Look at this. They still gotta fill this little area in here. They had a nuclear explosion. And look put a hole in it. Put a hole in the grate. It's what they call a China syndrome. It's out of control. They're never going to be able to get a hold of this thing. You can't. Radioactive contamination. Uninhabitable. Japan should have been evacuated, at least 40 million people due to Fukushima mega nuclear disaster, but denied any meltdowns have happened for several months, despite knowing within hours 20 millisieverts a year now okay to live in. They called for the evacuation of Tokyo.
Well, TEPCO is like the little Dutch boy. All of a sudden we have cracks in the dike. You put a finger here, you put a finger there, and all of a sudden new leaks start to occur, and they're overwhelmed. I suggest that they be removed from leadership entirely and be put as consultants. An international team of top physicists and engineers should take over with the authority to use the Japanese military. I think the Japanese military is the only organization capable of bringing this raging accident under control, at least have a reserve of troops that can go in for brief periods of time and bring this monster under control.
What about the evacuation zone? Is it big enough?
It's pathetic. They're literally making it up as they go along. We're in totally uncharted territories. You get any nuclear engineering book, look at the last chapter, and this scenario is not contained in the last chapter of any nuclear engineering textbook on the planet Earth. So they're making it up as they go along, and we are the guinea pigs for this science experiment that's taking place. But remember, in the area, the sea, we're talking about levels that are millions of times beyond legal levels found right there. And radiation has already appeared in the drinking water in Tokyo. And so people are wondering, you know, especially for young children, for pregnant women, should they leave? People are voting with their feet now. A lot of people are voluntarily evacuating from Tokyo because they simply don't believe the statements of the utility, which have consistently lowballed all the estimates of radiation damage.
Local authorities and fishermen say they're worried about the effects on the environment if something goes wrong.
I will give you my conclusion first. It poses no problems whatsoever. I ask that you read through the headlines and instead appraise the true situation.
Some may have concerns about Fukushima. Let me assure you, the situation is under control.
Should I get out of here?